Musings over MMOs with Belthazor3457. Hello YouTube. In this episode of Musings over MMOs, we're going to be talking a bit about World of Warcraft, its business model, the difference between casual and non-casual, and content based on that, including some of my ideology on leveling content. So how do we define a casual player nowadays? Well, first off, a brief history. And those of you whom have been subscribed to World of Warcraft for the past 4 years can skip ahead because you know this part already. There's an index in the description below this video for that purpose. But for those of you not in the loop, here's the story. Blizzard, let's talk about business. So 4 years ago, back in Burning Crusade, we didn't really have the stereotype about casual players being bad players. We had this thing called attunements, which were used instead of gear score, and the trend of casual players being stereotyped as bad players didn't really start forming until Wrath, and it didn't fully emerge until Cataclysm. Now let me tell you how the stereotype came about. Now, I'm going to explain things to you as I see them. Know that I don't have statistics to back up what I have to say, it's just how I perceive it, nothing more. But here it is, as I see it. So back in Burning Crusade, casual meant that you might not be able to meet your guild's rating schedule. It didn't mean that you were a bad player. So how'd this change? Well, Blizzard made an altercation to their business model. At the time, if I recall correctly, most people playing World of Warcraft were adults. The company wanted to expand the demographic to make the game a bit more child-friendly in the hopes of netting the kids and possibly also their parents. But the fact of the matter is a game for children is not a game for adults. So to address this issue, they had to decide how to best add in content for children, and in my opinion they made the wrong choice. Now what happened was Blizzard decided to make the game more child-friendly by converting the new content into child-friendly content, at the cost of adult content. Now, since they didn't want to completely alienate the large bulk of their current player base, this was done under the guise of pandering to casual players. After all, an adult has to work, has to go to his job, and might not have the same amount of free time as a child, right? So the guise of helping casual players was used to make the game more child-friendly. But this was a misnomer. In fact, this didn't pander to casual players at all. But the use of the phrase casual player began to take the shape of its true meaning in which it was being used for: bad players and children. The game started offering a lot of feel-good but generally useless rewards in the form of many of its achievements. Attunements were removed wholesale instead of being made account-bound, and boss fights were changed to be less mechanic-dependent and more gear-dependent, so that it would be easier for bad players and children to succeed. But when fight mechanics are removed wholesale to make fights easier, and we saw the beginning of this in late Burning Crusade with the Magister's Terrace nerfs, it doesn't matter if you increase the boss's health or overall melee damage if your goal is to make people play smarter. The rule of thumb in my gaming philosophy is an under-geared group should be able to kill a higher-up boss if they do not make any mistakes. By removing skill dependency in the form of removing fight mechanics, like stay out of the fire, and replacing them with gear dependency, you artificially make the player base more stupid by rewarding that kind of behavior. And that's how you make a successful game to sell to children in a lot of people's views. Now, here's where I think Blizzard made a mistake. It's fairly obvious to me that the word casual was used to mask the target market shift in Blizzard's business model, which was changed from adults and moved to children. Using the word casual was an attempt to retain and not offend the currently playing adults, and in my opinion this has failed abysmally, as demonstrated by the continuously dropping subscriber count, as demonstrated by the now strong stereotype of casual equals bad, and by having to offer Diablo 3 for people who agreed to stay subscribed for another year, which would, had World of Warcraft still been growing in terms of population, been a good sum of profit thrown down the drain for no reason. The only perceivable reason to offer a game as popular as Diablo in such a manner is to try to milk money out of World of Warcraft before it dies, or to attempt to keep it alive long enough to jumpstart it with the next expansion. I don't know for sure which Blizzard is shooting for at the moment, but I can take a guess as to if they're going to succeed or not, based on the beta footage I've seen on YouTube thus far. Spoiler alert. So I saw a video from OMFG Kata that demonstrated a playthrough of the Pandaren starting area. There's one quest that caught my attention. There's a quest where you need to jump onto a bunch of wooden poles and fight other pandas. As it turns out, you don't actually jump on them using the jump function in the game. You click it and use the poles like a vehicle mechanic, and all your character's movements on them are scripted. You're simply not allowed to fall off the poles or to fail the quest, even though the quest is all about jumping from pole to pole. We've got to the point where Blizzard is starting to show signs that they think the player base is so stupid that the majority can't be trusted with movement control for their own characters. Hopefully this is only confined to the starting area, but based on prior record, we can't assume this to be the case. If I had my way, you'd be jumping from pole to pole normally using the spacebar or whatever you bind your jump key to, and if you fell off, you'd fall into a pit of lava and die. Then after that, maybe new players will learn how to click one button at a specific time. You know what we need in World of Warcraft? More ominous pits of death. More undercity elevators. You know that lava pit between the Ironforge Bank and Auction House? You know how if you fall into it, you land on a metal catwalk and can just walk out? Let's get rid of the catwalk. Anyone who falls in dies to the lava and has to spirit res. Yeah, just imagine what kind of starting zone I'd put you through. Now here's where I think Blizzard made a mistake. They are a business after all, and a business exists to make as much money as possible when ethics are not considered. Someone at Blizzard decided that the best thing to do to reach this end was the casual ruse, combined with a child-friendly product. I think that this was the mistake. Not because it's unethical, but because it's not profitable in the long term. They chose to change nearly all of their current content into the child-friendly formula in the interest of obtaining the child market, and I think this was an unnecessary step, because of two things. First, you don't need to go all or nothing. The choice made here was to convert nearly all of the game's content into the child-friendly model, rather than simply a portion of it, or adding in some content for children and some for adults. The choice was made to push the vast majority of current players into a realm that the current player base would not enjoy, and it was unreasonable for the casual ruse to be expected to support this. So that's the first reason. Second, it's not actually all that difficult to add in certain content for children and certain content for adults. I think that the people who made the decision to focus on one section thought that to pander to two audiences, you needed two different products and double the costs. This isn't true. So here's my philosophy on leveling content. This is what I would do if I were running how World of Warcraft was being developed, or any MMO for that matter. Segregate the leveling content. You can have a zone for children and a zone for adults. Let's say new characters go from level 1 to 10 in a starting zone, and after that they get to choose which leveling zone they'd like to go to next. One is a level 10 to 20 zone for adults, one is a level 10 to 20 zone for children. There's no barrier blocking people from choosing which zone they quest in, but you remember that old daily quest from Storm Peaks that was really hard but awarded double golden reputation? That's the style the adult zones will take. You could call them heroic zones, I suppose that would be a fair comparison. Heroic zone quests will be significantly more difficult and have a lot of skill checks, but the quests would award triple the experience of a normal zone, and quests would reward blues instead of greens. Vice versa, back in the normal zones, they would remain pretty much the same as they are now. Smooth, easy leveling, and green quest rewards. So these zones aren't being nerfed, they're not losing anything. There's just other zones being added in that have more difficult quests. And by more difficult quests, I mean they have a lot of skill checks, stay out of the fire and that kind of stuff. Cataclysm babies might assume that the phrase more difficult quests means that the mob has triple health and takes longer to kill, and while not actually being more difficult in any way, simply succeeds in wasting your time. This isn't the case for the adult zones. It's all about the skill checks. You can level faster by using the adult zones, if you're good enough. And yes, there would be safeguards to prevent a higher level power leveling someone through it. You might think that some people will QQ because they're too scrubbed to quest in the adult zones, and you'd be right, some people will QQ. But how many people do you really expect to rage and subscribe because they couldn't figure out a quest? Or, more specifically, how many of those who would rage and sub over that wouldn't just rage and sub a little later over losing a roll on a piece of gear, for example? The answer is not enough to create profitability by pandering to them. The simple fact is that you will make more money by setting up options for people to choose which zones they would like to quest in and which content they would like to experience, and more money by gradually getting the players used to challenges over time via the use of the leveling content, so they are less prone to raging at max level over, say, losing a roll. The fact is that you will retain more subscribers and make more money by avoiding pandering to children than you would have by pandering to it. By pandering to children, you impose restrictions on the growth of your product sales, as demonstrated by the now dropping World of Warcraft subscriber count. So that's really all I had to say about business and the history of the casual stereotype. If people show an interest, I might make a follow-up video to this talking about my philosophy on various forms of content. Thanks for watching, leave a comment, say what you think about what was discussed in the video. Later, YouTube.